In 1873, Colt's new revolver sold for $17, about 2 weeks' wages for a working cowhand. They called it the Peacemaker, which is the darkest joke in American history because the men who bought it were not buying peace. Number 12 on this list could drop a target at half a mile, and one man used it to make a shot the Army swore was impossible. And number 3 belonged to a gunfighter so feared that towns went quiet when his name reached the telegraph office. These 25 guns built the legend of the American West, and the body counts attached to them grew taller with every retelling until nobody could tell the man from the myth. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because the truth behind these weapons is stranger than the movies ever told you. Let's count down. Number 25, the volcanic repeating pistol. Before there was a Winchester, there was this, a lever-action pistol from the 1850s that looked like the future and fired like a disappointment. Oliver Winchester and the partners who would become Smith and Wesson were all behind it, feeding tiny self-contained rounds through a tube beneath the barrel. On paper, it was a marvel. No loose powder, no caps, just work the lever and fire again. In practice, the rounds were so underpowered that men joked you could watch the bullet leave and step out of the way. It dropped few men and won fewer fights. But every legend has a humble beginning, and this awkward little pistol was the seed. The company that failed with it became the company that armed the entire frontier. The volcanic killed almost no one. What it killed was the age of the single shot. Number 24, the Smith & Wesson Model 1. In 1857, this little 7-shooter became the first American revolver to fire a fully self-contained metallic cartridge, and it changed everything quietly. Chambered in a feeble .22 rimfire, it was never the gun of the showdown. It was the gun in a gambler's vest, a shopkeeper's drawer, a saloon girl's garter. It cost around $12 and fit in a closed fist. Nobody bragged about killing a man with one because the .22 rarely killed cleanly. It maimed, it festered, it ended arguments in back rooms that never made the newspapers. Smith & Wesson held the patent on bored-through cylinders, which meant for years every cartridge revolver in America either came from them or broke the law. The Model 1 didn't win gunfights, it won the future of the cartridge, and the killers came later. Number 23, the Henry Derringer pocket pistol. Small enough to vanish in a palm, this single-shot percussion pistol was the weapon of last resort and dirty betrayal. One barrel, one ball, fired at a distance close enough to smell the other man's breath. It cost a few dollars and lived in coat pockets across the gambling halls of the Mississippi and the boom towns of the West. Here is the entry's dark fame. On an April night in 1865, a man named Booth pressed one of these to the back of Abraham Lincoln's head. That single shot proves the truth of the Derringer. It was never built for a fair fight. It dropped fewer men than any gun on this list, but the men it dropped were rarely looking. Card cheats, drunks, and one president. The Derringer was murder you carried in your pocket and used without warning. Number 22, the Colt Patterson. This was the one that started it all, the first practical revolving pistol Samuel Colt ever sold back in 1836. 5 shots, a folding trigger, and a fragile reputation because it broke as often as it fired. The Eastern Army shrugged at it, but out on the Texas frontier, Captain Jack Hayes handed Pattersons to his Rangers, and in 1844 they did the unthinkable. They charged a band of Comanche on horseback and kept firing. For the first time, a small force of white men did not have to halt and reload while arrows rained down. The Comanche, who counted their enemies' shots and attacked in the gap, had no gap to attack. The Patterson dropped men in small numbers, But it broke a rule of war that had held for centuries. It taught the West that one man could be five. Number 21. The Manhattan Navy revolver. Not every gun hand could afford a Colt, and the Manhattan Firearms Company knew it. They built a near-perfect copy of Colt's beloved Navy revolver, a .36 caliber six-shooter, and sold it for a few dollars less. To the trained eye, it was a knockoff. To a teamster or a drifter with thin pockets, it was a real gun for real money. Thousands found their way into holsters between the 1850s and the 1860s, and they killed exactly as well as the originals they imitated. Saloon disputes, road robberies, range arguments. The Manhattan never carried a famous name, never starred in a dime novel, never got a nickname worth remembering, and that is precisely why it dropped so many forgotten men. The legends carried Colts. The poor carried these. The graveyards filled the same either way. Number 20. The Star Army revolver. When the Civil War ended, hundreds of thousands of surplus revolvers flooded west in saddlebags and surplus crates, and the Star was everywhere among them. A heavy .44 caliber six-shooter made in single and double action versions, it was rugged, reliable, and dirt cheap once the Army no longer wanted it. Veterans drifting toward Texas and the cattle trails carried what they already owned, and what they owned was often a Star. It fought no famous duels. It earned no nickname. But the cowboy who pulled one in a stockyard fight cared nothing for fame. He cared that it fired when his thumb fell. The Star is a reminder that the West was not armed by gunsmiths and heroes. It was armed by the leftovers of a war that had already taught a generation of young men exactly how to kill. Number 19. The LeMat revolver. First pattern break. Here is where it gets strange. Imagine a revolver that held 9 shots instead of 6, and then imagine that the center pin those shots spun around was itself a second barrel, a stubby smoothbore loaded with buckshot. That was the LeMat, a Confederate-favored monster carried by cavalry officers who wanted 9 pistol rounds and 1 shotgun blast in a single weapon. Generals like Beauregard and the cavalryman, J.E.B. Stuart, strapped them on. The drill was simple and terrifying. Empty the 9 chambers into the fight, then flip a lever on the hammer and unleash a load of grape shot at point-blank range. Few were ever made, and fewer survived the war intact. But the LeMat earned its place because it answered a question no other revolver asked. Why drop one man when you could drop a cluster of them with the same trigger? Number 18. The Colt Dragoon. Big, brutal, and weighing better than 4 pounds, the Dragoon was a horseman's pistol, built so heavy that drawing it felt like lifting a hatchet. It fired a .44 caliber ball with enough powder behind it to knock a man off a galloping horse. Soldiers on the plains, freighters, and frontier lawmen of the 1850s strapped them to saddles because no man wanted to carry that weight on his hip all day. It was the pistol you reached for when the trouble might be a charging rider or a wounded animal that would not go down. The Dragoon dropped men, yes, but it earned its keep dropping things smaller men's guns could not. It was a transitional beast, too heavy for the quick draw that was coming, but a clear warning of how much killing power Colt could pack into one cylinder. Number 17. The Colt Walker. In 1847, a Texas Ranger named Samuel Walker sat down with Sam Colt and designed the most powerful handgun the world had ever seen, a title it would hold for nearly 90 years until the Magnum arrived in the 1930s. The Walker was enormous, almost 5 pounds loaded, with a charge of powder so heavy that careless cylinders sometimes burst. But when it fired correctly, it hit like a rifle. Rangers used them against Comanche and Mexican cavalry, and the legend of one ranger holding off a dozen riders was born from this iron. Only 1,100 were made for the military, which makes surviving originals worth more than a frontier town today. The Walker dropped men at distances no pistol had reached before. It proved the revolver was not a toy. It was artillery you could hold in one hand. Number 16. The Remington 1858 New Army. While Colt got the fame and the songs, plenty of hard men quietly preferred Remington, and they had a reason. The Remington's solid top strap made it stronger than the open-frame Colt, and you could swap a spent cylinder for a loaded one in seconds, a reload trick that mattered when 6 shots ran dry and the other man still stood. Frank James, brother of Jesse, swore by his Remingtons. Across the cattle towns and the outlaw trails of the 1860s and the 1870s, the New Army earned a reputation as the gun for a man who valued lasting over flashy. It cost a fair wage and outlived its owners. The Remington never got the nickname or the legend, but ask any gunsmith of the era which revolver he would trust with his life, and a great many answered with this one. Number 15. The Spencer Repeating Carbine. Before the Winchester ruled, the Spencer was the repeater that terrified men used to single shots. 7 rounds fed through a tube in the stock, worked by a lever, and Union cavalry used them to such devastating effect in the Civil War that Confederate soldiers complained the Yankees could load on Sunday and fire all week. When the war ended, the Spencers went west. Buffalo hunters, lawmen, and frontier settlers prized a gun that gave them 7 chances before reloading. Against attackers who counted on the pause after a shot, the Spencer removed the pause entirely. It dropped men by the simple, merciless math of volume. One defender with a Spencer was worth several with muzzle loaders. The Winchester would soon do it better, but the Spencer taught the frontier the lesson first. The age of the single shot was dying fast. Number 14. The Henry Rifle. They called it that damned Yankee rifle you load on Sunday and shoot all week, and the name stuck because it was nearly true. The Henry held 16 rounds in 1860, an unthinkable number, fed through a tube and cycled with a flick of the lever. A man with a Henry could pour out a wall of lead while his enemy fumbled with powder and ball. It was expensive, around $40 when a laborer made $1 a day, but for those who could afford it, the Henry was an unfair advantage made of brass and steel. Settlers under attack, lawmen facing gangs, and lone riders who expected trouble all blessed its magazine. The Henry rarely fought duels, because duels were for pistols. The Henry fought sieges, ambushes, and last stands. And in those, 16 shots was the difference between a grave and a story to tell. Number 13. The Winchester Model. 1866, the Yellow Boy. When Oliver Winchester took over the Henry and improved it, the result wore a bright brass receiver that gleamed gold in the sun, and the frontier named it the Yellow Boy. It fixed the Henry's worst flaw with a side loading gate, so a man could top off his magazine without disassembly, even mid-fight. It armed cowboys, settlers, lawmen, and the native warriors who acquired them through trade and battle, sometimes turning them back on the soldiers who brought them. The Yellow Boy was the rifle leaned in the corner of 10,000 frontier cabins. The gun grabbed first when dust rose on the horizon. It dropped men in raids and counter-raids across 2 decades. The brass made it pretty. The 15 rounds in the magazine made it lethal. The West did not buy it for its looks. Number 12. The Sharps Big 50. Now here is the shot the Army said could not be made. The Sharps was a single-shot rifle, but it fired a .50 caliber round the size of a man's thumb, and in the hands of a buffalo hunter, it could kill at distances that bordered on the unbelievable. In 1874, at the Second Battle of Adobe Walls, a hunter named Billy Dixon raised his borrowed sharps, aimed at a mounted warrior nearly a mile away, and fired. The man fell. The Army later measured the distance at over 1,500 yards, close to 9/10 of a mile, a shot so improbable that men called it luck, and Dixon himself agreed. But the sharps made it possible. Buffalo hunters slaughtered millions with these rifles, and hired killers like Tom Horn used their range to drop men who never saw the smoke. The sharps did not need to be close. That was the whole horror of it. Number 11. The Colt Lightning. In 1877, Colt answered a complaint heard in every gunfight. The single-action revolver was slow because you had to thumb the hammer back for every shot. The Lightning was double action. Pull the trigger, and it both cocked and fired in one motion, letting a desperate man empty the cylinder as fast as his finger could move. It was a slimmer, lighter gun, and legend places one in the hands of Billy the Kid himself, though historians still argue the point. What is certain is that the Lightning offered a deadly trade. More speed for less reliability, because the delicate action jammed when abused. Gamblers and gunmen who lived by the first shot loved it anyway. In a business where a half-second decided who walked away, the Lightning gave that half-second to the man willing to gamble it would not fail him. Number 10. The Smith & Wesson Schofield. Jesse James reportedly called it the finest weapon in the world, and a man in his line of work knew weapons. The Schofield was a top-break revolver, which meant the whole barrel hinged down and ejected every spent shell at once, so a rider could reload at a gallop without dropping a single round in the dirt. Against a Colt, which had to be loaded one slow chamber at a time through a side gate, the Schofield was a miracle of speed. The Army bought thousands, outlaws stole and traded for them, and the cattle trails carried them everywhere. For a robber who might face a posse and need 6 fresh rounds in seconds, that fast reload was the line between escape and the noose. The Schofield dropped men in robberies and running fights across the 1870s, and it dropped them with a quickness the Peacemaker could not match. Number 9. The Winchester Model 1873. They called it the gun that won the West, and for once the legend earned the title. Chambered in .44-40, the same round many Colts fired, it meant a man could carry one type of ammunition for both his rifle and his revolver, a small convenience that mattered enormously 100 miles from the nearest store. It cost around $50 and put a fast-firing, reliable repeater into the hands of cowboys, lawmen, outlaws, settlers, and warriors alike. More than 700,000 were made. It rode in every saddle scabbard, leaned in every line shack, and turned up at nearly every range, war, and ambush of the era. The 1873 did not belong to one famous killer. It belonged to all of them, and to the nameless thousands besides. No single rifle shaped more of the frontier or ended more of its arguments. Number 8. The double-barreled coach gun. 2 barrels, sawed short, loaded with buckshot, and almost impossible to miss with. The coach gun was the weapon of the shotgun messenger who rode beside the stagecoach driver, guarding the strongbox, which is exactly where the term riding shotgun comes from. At close range, it did not require a marksman, only nerve and a steady trigger. And at the OK Corral in 1881, it was a coach gun that Doc Holliday carried under his coat, handed to him by Virgil Earp, that turned a tense standoff into the most famous 30 seconds of gunfire in American history. Lawmen, Guards and outlaws all respected the shotgun for one reason: it forgave bad aim. A trembling, frightened man with a coach gun was deadlier at 10 feet than a steady gunfighter with a revolver. In the close quarters of the West, that made it one of the most feared guns of all. Number 7. The Colt Buntline Special. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. Picture a Colt Peacemaker with a barrel 1 foot long, almost absurdly so, supposedly gifted to Wyatt Earp by the dime novelist Ned Buntline as a reward for his frontier exploits. The long barrel meant greater accuracy and a heavier pistol whip, and the story says Earp wore his into legend in Dodge City and Tombstone. Here is the part the movies never tell you. There is almost no solid evidence the Buntline Special ever existed as described. The tale comes largely from a single 1931 biography written long after Earp's death, and historians have spent decades unable to confirm Buntline ever ordered such guns. The legend dropped men only on the page, but it earns its rank because it reveals the deeper truth of this whole list. In the West, the story of a gun killed reputations and ruled towns as surely as the gun itself. Number 6. The Pistols of Dallas Staudenmeier. Some guns earn their rank in a single afternoon. In April 1881, El Paso Marshal Dallas Staudenmeier stepped into a street erupting in gunfire, drew a Colt in each hand, and in roughly 5 seconds left 4 men dead. The newspapers called it 4 dead in 5 seconds, and the name followed him the rest of his short, violent life. Staudenmeier was a giant of a man, fast and fearless, and his twin Colts made him the terror of a town that desperately needed terrifying. But the West rarely let its killers grow old. Within 2 years, he too was shot dead in a saloon, his guns unable to save him from an ambush of his own. His pistols rank high not for a long tally, but for a brutal rate. Few weapons in frontier history dropped so many men in so little time. Number 5. The Shotgun of Killer Miller. Third pattern break, and the coldest entry on this list. Most names here belong to men who killed in the heat of a fight. Jim Miller killed for money, in the dark, on purpose. They called him Deacon Jim because he did not drink or smoke and went to church. And they called him Killer Miller because he was the West's most reliable assassin for hire. His weapon was a shotgun, and his method was patient murder from ambush, often as his target rode home at dusk. He wore a steel plate beneath his long coat that turned bullets, and survived gunfights that should have killed him. Estimates of his contract killings run past a dozen and climb toward 50 in the wildest tellings. There was no duel, no fair draw, no nickname earned in glory. Miller's shotgun ranks this high because it dropped men who never had a chance. In 1909, a mob finally hanged him for it. Number 4. The Colt of Billy the Kid. 21 men, he claimed, one for each year of his life, and whether you believe it or not, that boast made Billy the Kid immortal. The truth is likely smaller, perhaps 4 to 9 men he killed alone. But the legend never needed accounting. He carried a Colt revolver and a Winchester carbine through the Lincoln County War, a range conflict that turned New Mexico into a battlefield, and his speed and nerve became frontier gospel before he turned 21. Sheriff Pat Garrett finally ended it in a darkened bedroom in 1881, shooting the kid before the boy could place the unfamiliar voice in the dark. Billy's guns rank 4th not for the highest count, but for the way his myth swallowed the man. He became the face of the gunslinger, young and doomed and quick, and his Colt became the most romanticized iron in the West. Number 3. The Colts of John Wesley Hardin. Here is the man whose name emptied saloons. Hardin claimed 42 killings, and unlike most frontier boasts, his is hard to dismiss because he killed with a frequency that horrified even a violent age. The son of a preacher, he reportedly killed his first man as a teenager and never stopped, dropping soldiers, lawmen, gamblers, and strangers across Texas. The legend says he once shot a man through a hotel wall for snoring too loudly, and while that tale may be polished, it captures the dread he inspired. He favored colts and was said to be murderously fast, surviving for years as the most wanted man in the state. Prison finally caught him, and he studied law in his cell, but the old life pulled him back. In 1895, a lawman named John Selman shot him from behind in an El Paso saloon. Even Hardin's guns could not watch his back. Number 2. The Navy Colts of Wild Bill Hickok. No man in the West was more legend than fact than James Butler Hickok, and his pair of 1851 Colt Navy revolvers were as famous as he was. He wore them butt forward in a sash, drawing with a crossed, twisting motion, and the stories of his kills ran from a believable handful to an absurd 100, growing with every dime novel. What is real enough. In 1865, he faced Davis Tutt in a Springfield town square, the two men squaring off at a distance of some 75 yards, and Hickok dropped him with a single shot in what many call the first true quick-draw duel. He became a lawman, a showman, a myth in his own lifetime, and in 1876 in Deadwood, holding a poker hand of aces and eights, he was shot in the back of the head by a coward. His Navy Colts ranked second because they armed the man who became the Gunslinger. Number 1. The Colt Single Action Army, the Peacemaker. And finally, in first place, the one gun that dropped more men than any single gunslinger ever could. Introduced in 1873 and sold for $17, the Colt Single Action Army was the holster gun of the entire frontier. Lawmen wore it, outlaws wore it, cowboys, soldiers, ranchers, killers, and cowards all wore the same iron. Wyatt Earp carried one. Hardin carried Colts. Pat Garrett used one to end Billy the Kid. It was balanced, reliable, and brutally simple, and it fit the human hand like it had grown there. While the named legends each dropped their dozens, the Peacemaker dropped them by the uncounted thousands. In every nameless street fight and back alley quarrel the newspapers never recorded. That is why it takes the top spot. No man's tally comes close to the total written by this one design. The gunslingers became myths. The Peacemaker simply did the work, in every hand that paid for it. 25 guns, and the truth. Underneath all of them is the same. The West was not won by the fastest draw or the steadiest hand. It was won by iron and gunpowder, sold cheap to anyone with the money, and the legends grew tall because the truth was too ordinary to sell. Most of these men died the way they lived, shot from behind or hanged at the end of a rope, and the guns outlived them all. Which one surprised you? Tell me in the comments whether the Peacemaker earned the top spot or whether one man's pistol should have taken it. I already know which side I'm on.